And thank you, Minister, for bringing this legislation, and to the officials as well, and for your engagement at the Joint Oireachtas Committee. We benefited at the Joint Oireachtas Committee not just from the Department, but from many stakeholders and political parties and political activists, and people from non-governmental organisations, as well as those who are involved in modern communications and social media platforms. And all of them, we benefited from all of their inputs, and they were very welcome. And it's really important, this piece of legislation, because, you know, the legislation here is designed to essentially reinforce and protect our democracy. This legislation goes to the core of protecting. We have one of the oldest running continuous democracies, but goes to the core of trying to not just protect the democracy, but actually ensure that its architecture and its structures and its operations into the future are sustainable and robust. And I don't think really at any other time has our democracy been under greater threat. And so this is timely. It's been talked about for a very long time, way before this government. So I congratulate you, Minister, and I congratulate this government for bringing forward this legislation and doing it in a very prompt fashion, but doing it also in an inclusive fashion, and designing legislation that is intended to bring us into the next century of our democracy. We saw how in the aftermath of the presidential election in the US, there were a direct attempt to undermine democracy, a direct attempt to deny the people the outcome of their election. And in the aftermath of our own last general election, we saw a party that didn't receive anything near a majority of the vote hold mass rallies in an attempt to assert their dominance, despite the will of the people, despite the outcome of the votes, despite the fact that they were way off anything like a majority. And so it's really important, not just for us here today, but for our children and our children's children, and for our country's democracy into the future, that we get this legislation right. And I think this legislation goes a very long way to achieving that. And so I'm very happy to support the legislation. In terms of the establishment of an independent statutory commission beyond the politics, the day-to-day of politics, I defy anybody to have an argument with that. That's something robust, substantial, that will serve our state right into the future, regardless of who's in power or who is the flavour of the week. Its independence will be enshrined in this legislation, and it will be resourced and structured in a way that will safeguard democracy and delivery of democracy into the future. The research and the education functions, really, really important that we would have a statutory authority to do that. The boundary reviews, in my own constituency of Dublin Central, in my own lifetime, how many boundary reviews have there been? It's very hard, and you know, for voters, it's very undermining. Voters complain about the changes to the boundaries and to the ever-changing nature of them. So it's really important that the Electoral Commission will have responsibility for boundary reviews. The Register of Electors has historically been administered, and is still today, by the local authorities. And I commend everybody in the franchise section of the local authorities who have maintained our registers to date. But those registers fall far short of what is required in a modern democracy. And so it is right that this legislation seeks to improve the registers by creating a shared register, by creating a rolling register, one that will be a living, live, shared database. There have been political organisations that have attempted to do the state's job, that have created their own database outside of this state, who have operated that database and combined not just the Register of Electors, but the marked Register of Electors. Very privileged information. Think of it, you go in to vote. You know, the privilege of having an opportunity to vote. But one of the things you expect is the privacy of your vote. And you don't expect that information to be taken and to be combined and shared and hosted in another country, in another jurisdiction. But that's what has been done. That is how our registers have been abused. And those are facts. So I think it is really welcome that this legislation is going to tackle that issue and is going to ensure that the state is responsible for not just the compiling, but the operation and the maintenance of our registers. And they will do that on a continuous basis. The fact that the registers will also encourage pre-registration for younger voters, that it will create for the first time the ability for homeless people to be registered. Really, really important. I would like the legislation to also deal with the issue of personation, though. I think that's a very important issue and a real weakness and risk to our democracy. I believe that the Electoral Commission should have the power to appoint independent personation officers in each polling station, and that those personation officers should be charged with ensuring that there is no personation taking place. And there should be a severe offence to anybody who attempts to undermine our democracy by personating another voter. And in terms of the political advertising and the fundraising, and I see I'm running out of time, there are two really, really important, I look forward to further debates on this, Minister, but there are two really important elements to this legislation as well that I'll touch on briefly, Cearlach. The fundraising that political parties that operate solely within this state rely on are the fundraising that is accessible to people who actually take an interest in their communities and who want to make a contribution, who want to support the ideals and the values that they subscribe to and that those who represent them subscribe to. And I welcome the fact that fundraising ability at a level of €10, an amount of money that will make it accessible to almost every member, every citizen in our society. And the regulation of online political advertising, the social media platforms themselves told us, on the record of the House, truth does not matter. It is not their business. They don't care. They are not interested in the veracity of the information, the messages, the political propaganda that is posted, shared, promoted on their sites. It is incredibly important for our democracy that we ensure there is regulation of all of the social media platforms and all of the political messaging and all of the political advertising so that there is at least some modicum of honesty in that. Gormagat.